opposed unless there are major changes to federal immigration enforcement. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn says Democrats don't care about public safety.
Democrats do not want to fund law enforcement. They want to defund law enforcement. They want to abolish ICE. So we will fund DHS through the rest of President Trump's term.
And the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday set the stage for Alabama to eliminate one of two largely black congressional districts before this year's midterm elections, creating an opening for Republicans to gain additional U.S. House seats in a battle for control of the closely divided chamber. For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement across our nation and around the world who hold fast to the inerrancy of Scripture and the hope of holiness. We do this through bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kind of pastors we need leading churches in the future, we invite you to think about giving to Wesley Biblical Seminary. Learn more about us at wbs.edu.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, May 12th, and the Department of Justice is really just getting going, I think, after Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche took over, and finally the DOJ is acting on some cases that I think they really should. Unfortunately, they didn't act on indicting Anthony Fauci. The deadline actually expires today. So Rand Paul yesterday was telling the DOJ via X that it needed to at least initiate some kind of charges against Fauci. And in my opinion, they should have, and then deal with the question of the pardon after the fact. Obviously, that is a complete defense if the pardons would have survived a legal challenge, but then at least they would have preserved the ability, if the pardons ended up being ineffective and they were not legally valid, they would have preserved the charges under the statute of limitations. But we'll see where it all goes from here. But the DOJ is suing the state of Colorado, my former home state, over a law restricting the capacity of rifle cartridges. So this is just yet another attempt by what has become a really, unfortunately, blue, progressive state, liberal state, to restrict the free exercise of the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. So this coming from Colorado Newsline, supporters of the ban decried the Trump administration's lawsuit as a dangerous threat to public safety. Hilarious, actually. And so the Trump administration is suing Colorado over its law restricting large capacity magazines for rifles a day after it sued Denver over its assault weapons ban. So two of those lawsuits are now being initiated by the Department of Justice, so Colorado and then also in Denver. And so the lawsuit filed by the U.S. Department of Justice last week says that the state's restrictions on magazines capable of holding more than 15 rounds violate the Second Amendment rights of Coloradoans. So Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, who leads the Civil Rights Division, said in a statement, Colorado's ban on certain magazines is political virtue signaling at the expense of Americans' constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Under my direction, the division's Second Amendment section will continue to defend law-abiding Americans' rights against unconstitutional restrictions on their right to possess arms, which are owned by tens of millions of their fellow citizens. And last week, Dillon also wrote to Denver and Colorado officials saying the department would file more lawsuits if they did not voluntarily comply with demands to cease enforcement of bans on semi-automatic rifles and large-capacity magazines. And Denver City Attorney Miko Brown responded, calling the request, quote, baseless, irresponsible, and a clear overreach of the federal government's power apparently he's never read the Constitution. But both of these lawsuits that have been filed say enforcement of the state and city policies deprive citizens of their Second Amendment rights, and the lawsuits make identical requests of the court to prohibit Denver and the state of Colorado from enforcing their bans and order that they adopt new policies and procedures. So let's welcome in Taylor Rhodes, who is the communications director for the National Association of Gun Rights and a Coloradoan. So Taylor, I'm really happy to see the Department of Justice step in here.
This is a complete 180 from even, 60 days ago from what the Department of Justice is doing. Certainly a complete 180 of Trump's first term on guns, at least. And it's a breath of fresh air. The National Association for Gun Rights, actually our former attorney, a guy named Barry Arrington, is now leading that Second Amendment division at DOJ. He's actually sued over this magazine ban once in state court and a separate time in federal court. I think this is the third time he is now sued over it now with the DOJ, and we're extremely excited for the work the DOJ is about to do in Colorado and presumably many states around the country to restore the freedoms of Second Amendment rights for Americans, not just in Colorado but around the country.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I didn't know that Barry Arrington was over at the DOJ. That's fantastic. I've known him for years, and he's an excellent attorney. So that's incredible. And these are really good moves by the DOJ to ensure that states, blue states like Colorado, hopefully they'll be the DOJ will be suing in other states similarly. They had a win a while ago in New York, but that was obviously not under Todd Blanche and this particular DOJ. But we've seen that the challenges, at least over the last decade or so, to some of these restrictions have been upheld ultimately by the Supreme Court. And even though we haven't had a lot of Supreme Court cases, I think the last one that they really, besides the New York case that they really got into the Second Amendment, was Heller back in 2005. So there hasn't been a lot of jurisprudence, but every time that this has been challenged, even on a lower court level, generally the Second Amendment has prevailed, and these restrictions have been found unconstitutional. So I would expect that the DOJ will win here.
We're very hopeful. The 10th Circuit is one of those circuits that it can go either way, but we are hopeful that things go well for Colorado gun owners in this circumstance. I mean, they need the relief. Colorado has gone hog wild with passing gun control over the last 13 years. And this magazine ban that has been on the books for 13 years has been the cornerstone of all of their gun control that they have passed. And getting that off the books would be a major blow to the left.
Yeah, and gun control advocates are basically people who just want to restrict lawful carry. They claim that these types of magazine restrictions are in order to save lives, because during mass shootings, it forces shooters to reload more often. But that argument, to me, it presumes that everyone who would carry this type of magazine would do that for some kind of nefarious purpose. And it's just a slippery slope to say, well, then even just carrying any sort of weapon would enable a mass shooter, or even any sort of magazine or something that's not, reloadable, like an old Revolutionary War musket or something, So it seems like
Right.
that type of argument, it doesn't really hold a lot of water.
Well, it doesn't, and even more importantly, now with the Bruin test, we have to find things that are in common use. We believe that there are literally millions upon millions upon millions of these things that are in circulation right now. We believe they're certainly in common use. They're not out of the ordinary or dangerous. They're a tool used by millions of law-abiding Americans for legal purposes, and hopefully the court agrees with that.
Yeah, and this type of challenge, I mean, it's interesting to me to see how the restrictions on gun rights are obviously more prevalent in blue states than red states, but that there hasn't been some sort of reciprocal type of legislation that Congress has implemented to basically establish a baseline and say, okay, states can be even less restrictive, for example, which is how they should act with fundamental constitutionally protected rights, but they can't be more restrictive. And so this is something that I would love to see this Congress, I mean, among a myriad of many other pieces of legislation that they really need to act on. And it's been frustrating, I think, to a lot of us that this Congress hasn't really done a lot. But is there any particular kind of legislation that the National Association for Gun Rights is advocating for in this vein or within the Second Amendment context to make it even more clear to these blue states that this type of legislation would violate the Constitution?
Well, I think the number one piece that we're advocating for is a simple idea called national constitutional carry. Right now, 29 states have a law on the books that is very simple. If you can legally possess a handgun, you can legally carry that handgun. National constitutional carry would level that playing field that not just folks in red states could enjoy that right, but those in blue states as well. Saying the Constitution is your carry permit, the way the founders intended. And that legislation is something that we're pushing alongside Thomas Massey in the House and Mike Lee in the Senate, and we're very hopeful that that piece of legislation would. I mean, think about this. I mean, Gavin Newsom's head would explode, but think about all of the people in California that would be relieved of the chains of gun control. And not have to go through one of the most rigorous permitting systems in the country. It would be a fantastic piece of legislation.
Yeah, and Thomas Massey and Mike Lee have been advocating for this for years, and it seems like in a Congress where the Republicans do control the House and the Senate, this would be at least passable in the House, and then turning to the Senate.
Right.
But it's really frustrating that this hasn't been done sooner. But if the DOJ wins this case in Colorado, are there other state gun laws that suddenly become vulnerable, or is this magazine capacity restriction only currently in Colorado?
No, there's states all over the country that have restrictions just like this. I mean, you look at California, you look at Illinois, Washington has it. In Massachusetts, Mitt Romney passed a bill like this when he was the governor there. There's states like this all over the country that need relief, just like Colorado does. I actually envision the DOJ does. If they can get a win off of this, they will go then file cases like that in all of these states. Additionally, I think that they likely start playing a little bit of whack-a-mole here. And in Florida, there's gun control. In Alabama, there's gun control. I would not be surprised in states like Florida and Alabama that they sue over some of the gun control that's on the books, like Florida's red flag law or Alabama's law that prohibits people from carrying at a protest. I think that the DOJ is very likely to go after some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I would hope that that here in Florida, our Attorney General, even on the state level, who's a great conservative, would sue over some of those things as well. Because I agree with you. I mean, these some of these things that were passed specifically, like Colorado, in the aftermath of the Aurora Theater shooting, I think was when this magazine capacity legislation restriction was implemented, and just like Florida, that was after a shooting, and it was somewhat of a PR response of the legislature, which then has a ripple effect and ultimately ends up infringing on citizens' rights. And so the DOJ, though, in its Civil Rights Division under Harmeet Dillon, now has a dedicated Second Amendment section. That's fantastic, and that's a pretty major shift in philosophy for a DOJ.
It certainly is. You would not have seen that in Joe Biden's administration. Maybe you would have, but they would have gone out doing the exact opposite.
It would have been a dedicated gun control section. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct.
And so, the Supreme Court has really changed the legal landscape for gun rights and protections, and ultimately this court, overall, at least in its majority, is more friendly, I think, to an originalist interpretation and a correct interpretation of the Second Amendment. So I'm more confident that the DOJ is confident, because even if they don't prevail at the lower courts, they end up having confidence that the Supreme Court will go their way. But like you said, the 10th Circuit is friendly, and this really boils down also to getting really good judges and also getting really good legislators, because even in states, a good state legislature could go back and undermine their own prior bad legislation, and it wouldn't even need a legal contest.
Certainly so. Yeah, elections are the ultimate cure to all of this. I pray that Colorado will see the light and change leadership. It seems unlikely right now, but that is our hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Taylor Rhodes, we've got to take a break here, but he's the communications director for the National Association of Gun Rights, and you can follow him on X, and you should. But yeah, as he said, this is why elections matter, because ultimately elections put our legislatures and our governors and our federal legislators in office, and also we end up with at least in states like Colorado that has an appointment system through the governor, and then a judicial retention system through the voters. That ultimately matters to the court system. And then, of course, the president is the one that nominates Supreme Court justices when there's a vacancy. So all of these things ultimately boil down to being responsible citizens. And if we want to make sure that our constitutionally protected rights are continued to be protected, then we've got to vote wisely and vote conservatively. So we will be right back with more.
Maybe this is you too. There's enormous frustration right now with healthcare costs. It is amazing. Healthcare costs for families in the last 20 years have almost tripled, and it just keeps getting worse. All this to say, this is why MediShare is so in demand right now. People are looking for alternatives, and MediShare is proven. You can save thousands of dollars a year and actually like it more. Over 1 million Americans are now part of healthcare sharing, and MediShare is the gold standard. It's trusted, it works, it's been helping people save money and have peace of mind now for 30 plus years. It's not some big impersonal thing either. It's a community of people like you helping each other. So yeah, if you're frustrated too, here's your chance to make a refreshing change. You'll notice the difference as soon as you call. They're easy to talk to. You can get a price within 2 minutes. Here is the number. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
This spring marks the 32nd anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, in which nearly 1 million people in this African nation were slaughtered in only a few days' time. Hutu and Tutsi families have grieved the loss of loved ones, and that includes Dali.
Her husband and one of her sons were killed, and she just couldn't forgive those who killed her loved ones. True forgiveness only came when she learned about Christ's work at the cross, about which she was reading in her Bible. So she recalled that Jesus asked his Father to forgive those who punished him.
Reading those words of Jesus in her very own Bible is what helped Dali find the grace and gumption to forgive those who murdered her family. And today, 100 in her small village in Rwanda have said yes to Jesus after seeing how he's brought healing to Dali and to so many who lack access to God's Word. $5 sends a Bible, $100 sends 20, $500 sends 100. Walker?
Give generously at 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stern. Stand by for news and commentary next. Walgreens says enough is enough. They are closing their store in the Cottage Grove section of Chicago. The store says they've lost more than $1 million in revenue due to shoplifting. They also have to spend $400,000 a year purchasing lockboxes and hiring full-time security. Even then, local residents still find a way to steal booze, cigarettes, and threaten staffers who try to stop them. But Chicago Alderman William Hall says Walgreens is the bad guy here, accusing the pharmacy giant of being racist. He says companies like Walgreens have a history of abandoning majority black neighborhoods. Closure by color, that's how he framed it. The citizens of Cottage Grove seem to think that Walgreens has a responsibility to stay in business in a neighborhood that is robbing them blind. And that's simply not true. You know, it seems to me the broader issue that they should have discussed is what to do with all the criminal thugs who've taken control of their neighborhood. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, are we watching the emergence of a new global axis against the United States, or is Trump just trying to prevent simultaneous crises with China and Iran? Well, if you look at the headlines, Reuters says this: stung by the Iran war, Trump heads to China in need of wins. So that's, of course, their framing. But CNBC says what's at stake for trade, Taiwan and Iran in Trump's high-risk summit with China's leader Xi. So President Trump is poised to meet face-to-face with the Chinese president this week for a much-anticipated summit in Beijing. Trump will meet with President Xi Jinping amid a record low voter popularity as gas prices spike due to the Iran war. Trump's trip will be the week after Iran's foreign minister visited Beijing ahead of an expected meeting between Xi and Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who also, according to The Independent, Europe has rejected Putin's pick for a peace mediator after the claim that the war is, quote, coming to an end. So Putin had suggested a former German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, could help mediate peace talks, but many European leaders rejected the idea. And Putin told reporters on Saturday he believed the war was coming to an end and said he would be open to negotiating new security terms with Europe. So let's welcome in Scott Eulinger, who's a former intelligence agent. And Scott, from an intelligence perspective, what is really happening between Trump and Xi right now beyond just the public trade headlines?
Right. Well, you know, China's always has a very interesting dynamic right now. They kind of like Iran. They like to put on a really bold face and all. But right now they've got China's got some really, really huge problems. For one thing, the Trump foreign policy has been an attempt to basically contain China. That's what Venezuela was mostly about, ending Chinese influence in the Americas, making sure that the Panama Canal is secure, et cetera. And now with what's going on with Iran and the blockade, China has been largely cut off from cut-rate oil, which it had been depending on, because already it has a weak economy. Xi is increasingly authoritarian. Foreign investment has absolutely dried up in the past 5 years. And he's becoming basically more and more like Mao every single day. He's purging his military. The threat to Taiwan has gone away for at least 3 or 4 years, at least, simply because there is no more military leadership. It's all been gutted. They're all dead, fell out a window, or are in a penal camp. So Trump is holding a lot of the cards, meeting with Xi, although Xi may feel right now a false sense of confidence that somehow, because the Iran war has slowed down, that somehow China is going to come out of this ahead. But really, the time is not the friend of China, the same as time is not the friend of Iran.
And so is this summit then fundamentally actually about economics, or is it more about Trump pressuring China with the leverage that it may actually have over Iran economically and politically?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. He has a lot of business men, including Elon Musk, going over to China. And he's interested in, he likes to use both, basically tariffs and stuff to kind of control China, but at the same time is extending a hand in cooperation, which hopefully is there's a lot of realism in their pragmatism, because China basically does not mean the U.S. any good at all, much as we'd like to pretend otherwise. But he also wants to ask, I think, and see, this is where Xi's may have an idea that, this summit is good for China, because he's maybe asking for China's intervention to influence Iranian policy a bit. Meanwhile, though, Chinese arms exports and also raw materials which supply their ballistic missiles are continuing to go to Iran. So hopefully that's another thing. Trump will be asking him for a favor, but at the same time, hopefully he'll also be hinting that such things should not be tolerated, because basically China is helping Iran to fight against all of its Middle Eastern neighbors and the United States.
Yeah. And so how much leverage does China actually have over Iran? I mean, what realistically can President Trump ask Xi?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, they've with a lot of their weapons destroyed, perhaps they are somewhat they may be somewhat vulnerable to Chinese pressure, because they're depending on raw materials for their fuel, for their missile fuel, as well as arms exports of weapons which actually have failed every single time that they've been used against the U.S. Navy or anyone else. So basically right now, China may be in a better position to influence Iran. But then, of course, the real question is, how subject to influence is Iran? Their leadership has proven even more apocalyptic and kamikaze than even I had thought. And so I don't really think they're going to be listening to China a great deal. But basically the intelligence picture. There's so much here we don't know. There's so much here I don't know. How large is the schism or the chasm between individual Iranians, like the IRGC, and the political leadership? How bad is that? And then, of course, you have to deal with the dynamics of the Chinese effect on all of that. So there's a lot of unknowns here for me. And I hope and I believe that Trump has intelligence information which is giving him the insight to make these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and hopefully so. And so, where are we at with the regime change in Iran? I mean, who would China even be talking to seek to influence Iran at this point?
Right. That's the big question. But I think from what I see, it's pretty obvious after these constant and relatively useless discussions, which basically Iran is acting as if it's winning the war. I mean, it's the most bizarre situation where a country it's like Hitler negotiating with the Russians for a Russian surrender, like when they're one block from the chancellery in Berlin. It makes no sense. But that's the way this apocalyptic Shia death cult is. And so I think that the only way really to do this is they have to eliminate the leadership. And I mean everyone. They've got to kill enough of the leadership that there is finally someone that they can deal with. And I think that is the unpleasant truth. How would you do that? Well, one major thing you would do is you've got to restore the internet. They have not had internet for at least 60 days. I think maybe even just 90 days, the Iranian people. They have some Starlink. They've got to get them online, because that's the way they organize and can mobilize against the regime. And, of course, they also need to be armed. And that has started, although apparently Trump even said it, that like they gave some weapons to the Kurds to give to the Iranian people, and the Kurds kept them themselves, the weapons. So that effort has been dulled, and they need to redouble that. They need to arm the people. They need to reestablish communication. And then the last thing would be they need to continue what they started about a month ago, and that is hit the regime at the power centers that terrorize the people. the police stations, the besieged headquarters, the checkpoints that exist in every city in Iran. That's what they need to do, and they need to do it hard, because that is the only way you're really going to have regime change. And I see regime change as the only possibility to negotiate some kind of stability with Iran, because you cannot leave these guys in power. And that's another reason why the UAE and other countries have already joined the war. And now UAE is attacking positions in Iran because they realize that you can't have half measures. You can't damage or destroy 80% of this regime and expect the other 20% of the regime to get along nicely with its neighbors. It's a snake that has to be absolutely crushed. And that's why the Middle Eastern countries, they understand this, and that's why they're starting to contribute to the war.
And that all makes perfect sense. And I've seen some articles and analysts arguing that China and also Russia actually prefers that the U.S. is tied down in the Middle East conflicts because it distracts from Taiwan, and then it also distracts from the Ukraine war. I mean, we certainly haven't seen as much rhetoric from the Democrat side on Ukraine and Russia. Is that really credible?
Yes, that is absolutely. There's no question that is absolutely a Chinese strategy. That's the whole reason that they support Iran, and that's the whole reason they were in the Panama Canal and involved in Venezuela and other places in South America, because the last thing that China wants is the United States to be concentrated on them. And so they'll do anything to prevent that. And so that's another reason why all these things that are happening all over the world are not to China's benefit, because it becomes apparent that the Trump foreign policy is aimed at China, because we know that they are the primary, basically, threat to national security, and they don't want us to realize that.
Yeah, so the old motto, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so with that in mind, are we moving kind of toward a de facto China, Russia, Iran axis, even if it's not as formal of an alliance?
Oh, that absolutely. That axis has existed for years. I've talked about it on radio dozens of times. That axis is real. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing it being absolutely degraded. Russia is clearly fading. They're having real problems. Putin's paranoia seems justified. China is also very vulnerable right now. But at the same time, when these countries, and of course we know what's going on with Iran, but the problem is these countries get increasingly desperate. Sometimes they pull moves which are not necessarily logical. And so there's the danger. So Xi is at the weakest point he probably has been in since he took power. But at the same time, so in some ways, therein lies the danger. And so the United States has got to be careful about that. And that's perhaps one reason why Trump is actually visiting Xi at this time.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And so with all of this in perspective, I mean, I think Trump obviously knows the players. He knows what's at stake. And so from a strategic perspective, what is Trump's actual doctrine right now? I mean, is it more deterrence, economic coercion? I mean, what can we expect from this meeting with Xi as far as his goals going in?
Right. Well, his foreign policy, his goals are both of what you said. It's somewhat to basically make Fortress America the entire Western Hemisphere, to have the United States not dependent on things like rare earth metals, et cetera, that the United States will be an oil exporter, that it will be energy independent and resource independent, not dependent on China at all. The United States will control the gates for oil and such, and in doing so will basically have a lot of influence, whether they like it or not, on China's moves. Because if the United States has locked up most of China's oil supply, then we can kind of control what they do or severely penalize them when they step out of line. So that's what this is. That's what his whole foreign policy is about, and he's doing it, and it's been succeeding magnificently. And now we've just got to get over the hump of the Iranian war, because once that's resolved, then China is really going to have far fewer alternatives to misbehave and challenge the United States.
Yeah, and you've mentioned previously, Scott Ewlinger, that Americans kind of tend to think in election cycles. China thinks way more long-term strategically, more in decades. And so this type of pressure and the goals that President Trump is laying out, I mean, even though maybe any sort of issue with Taiwan has been deferred 2 to 4 years, there's still realistically a lot of short-term pressure that needs to be put on China to make sure that they're not just running out the clock of Trump's administration. And so how does that ultimately factor into this?
Right. Well, right. Everyone's basically depending on running out the clock on Trump. That's definitely Iran's strategy, and China as well. But let's not give China as much credit as you just did. This sort of pro-Chinese propaganda that they think in decades. Right now, Xi is thinking in terms of year by year because the guy is purging his military like there's no tomorrow. So communists are naturally, they may think a little bit in a decade or so, but most of the time they're very reactive and they're very inefficient and incompetent. And so that's what you're seeing in China now, flailing around, threatening its neighbors, foreign investment drying up, lying about their population and their population growth, lying to themselves about everything, because that's what communists do. And so Trump is definitely out-Chinesing the Chinese in terms of planning. It's clear that he and his staff are planning like a very large overarching strategy that is built to ensure U.S. domination over China for the next, 25 years.
Well, that's really encouraging, and I'm glad that we don't have to give the communists as much credit as perhaps I just did. So, Scott Eulinger, that's why I always appreciate your insights and analysis of all this. I mean, so much going on, and it seems like, Trump is very concerned about what's happening globally, as he should be, and hopefully the base and the electorate recognize that. And even if, there's a few things that we're concerned about, like gas prices and so forth, we recognize the bigger picture. And some of those things can also be corrected ahead of the midterms, just for people who, vote understandably based more on their wallet than kind of an overall global strategy. But really appreciate your insights, Scott Eulinger. You can follow him on X, and you should. We will be right back with more.
Tune in Saturdays at 1:30 Central for The Compass with host Rick Beggs and iVoter Guide President Debbie Wuthnow. Each weekend, The Compass will seek to navigate the public square with faith, truth, and conviction. Rick and Debbie will keep tabs on upcoming elections and remind us of the importance of our participation in them. The Compass reminds us that God is our true north. Be listening for The Compass, Saturday afternoons at 1:30 Central on American Family Radio.
The Bible talks about money a lot. More than 2,300 verses touch on wealth, possessions, generosity, and stewardship. And one of the clearest principles is this: money itself is not the goal. It's simply a tool God places in our hands to accomplish something far greater than ourselves. What am I trusting right now, God or money?
Faith and Finance with Rob West, weekdays at 9 a.m. Central or on the AFR app.
Hey everybody, it's Chad with the band Unspoken. I've seen firsthand how powerful it is when the church comes together, and that's exactly what Redeem Health Share is all about. With rising medical costs, Redeem offers a more affordable way to care for your family. Their flexible programs are designed to fit your budget without sacrificing your values. Each month, members contribute a share amount to help pay each other's medical bills, and you choose the providers and the treatments that are right for your family. It's not just about the money, it's about community. Redeem Health Share is rooted in biblical principles. So whether it's a routine visit or sudden emergency, there's a caring Christian community walking with you every step of the way. This time of the year is a great reminder to make choices that reflect our faith So if you're looking for another way forward, one that reflects your faith, this is it. Call 844-REDEEM-0 today. Join the movement, share joyfully, and live redeemed.
America was founded as a nation under God, but the U.S. Supreme Court has broken our national relationship with God. Many court rulings have contributed, but 3 stand out. In 1962, the court removed prayer from public schools. In 1963, the court removed Bible reading from public schools. And lastly, in 1980, the court removed the 10 Commandments from America's classrooms. The Supreme Court broke our relationship with God, and any restoration of that relationship must include the Supreme Court. And a vacancy on the Supreme Court could soon be coming. So please support AFA Action's urgent legal work to help President Trump select and the U.S. Senate confirm godly constitutional justices for the Supreme Court. We put thousands of hours of research into potential nominees. We use our networks at the Trump administration and the U.S. Senate to promote the good nominees and oppose the bad ones. AFA Action needs the resources of supporters like you to help maximize our efforts. So please visit afaaction.net to learn more and donate today.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, and a really crazy headline that dropped late yesterday. Eileen Wang, the mayor of Arcadia, California, has been charged with acting as an illegal foreign agent for China. The Justice Department announced on Monday, so it was late yesterday. Wang agreed to plead guilty. The Justice Department said, so this coming from ABC News, starting in late 2020, Wang and Yang, a guy who goes by Mike, probably because nobody can pronounce that in America, son, worked together to operate a website called U.S. News Center that, quote, purported to be a news source for the local Chinese American community. The Justice Department said in a plea agreement that Wang and son, quote, received and executed directives from the People's Republic of China government officials to post pro-PRC content on the website and sometimes sought approval from PRC government officials to circulate other pro-PRC content. So in one instance, in November 2021, Wang wanted to circulate an article about the Chinese and Russian ambassador asking for Americans to respect the People's Republic of China's quote-unquote democratic rights. So this is what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs wants to send, she said. And so in her plea agreement, she admitted to not notifying the Attorney General that she was working for the PRC, especially when she's in elected office in California. So the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, John Eisenberg, said, quote, individuals elected to public office in the United States should act only for the people of the United States they represent. It is deeply concerning that someone who previously received and executed directives from the People's Republic of China government officials is now in a position of public trust at all, but particularly so because that relationship with a foreign government had never been disclosed. So let's welcome in Gerard Felitti, who is an attorney at the Lawfare Project. And Gerard, this is kind of wild.
It's wild and it's stunning. We're talking about an elected official in the United States whose loyalty wasn't to her constituents. It was to the government of China. Literally, the People's Republic of China bought a seat at the table in America's local government. And the question we have to ask is how many other seats they're currently occupying and how far these influence networks extend. This isn't new, but it really is shocking the extent to it of the power that some of these agents of China wield within the United States.
Yeah, and there are so many more questions that at least the reporting so far hasn't covered. I mean, I would love to know, is she a dual citizen? What exactly is the scope and the background of her nationality? Did the People's Republic of China, through any maybe shell donor groups, contribute to her campaign and try to prop her up in order to have that influence? I mean, what all do we know at this point about this particular case?
Well, what we do know that she was born in China and that she moved to California at some point in the early 2000s. We're not clear whether she's a dual national or fully naturalized or not. But nevertheless, she was able to be elected to the office of mayor in Arcadia. So that's shocking in and of itself.
But what we do know is that the U.S. government is looking at this more as an espionage case, more as a national security case, not just a disclosure case. We're sometimes familiar with the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, which requires people who are agents of a foreign government to register. This is not that. This is something that's much more heinous. This is someone who is an active agent of the Chinese government who is acting as an agent within the U.S., registration notwithstanding. So this is more of a national security investigation. That's the interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see if there is a network, if there are other people across the U.S. who are implicated.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, it's not like if she had just been open about the fact that she was working for the People's Republic of China, that, okay, that would be fine. That's not the only concern here, is just that failure to disclose. It's the fact that she was in elected office. And, our Constitution requires that our president has to be a born citizen rather than naturalized, which makes sense, so that we don't have someone who's in the highest office in the land that may have other loyalties to other foreign countries. I've said for a long time that requirement and restriction needs to be applied to every elected office. I mean, if you come here legally, you're naturalized, whether or not you ultimately end up becoming a citizen, allowed to vote, all of those other questions. I don't think that anyone who was not a born citizen should be able to hold elected office, period.
Well, the one thing that I would push back on that is I think that over the years we've seen a lot of people go back to Henry Kissinger. We've seen plenty of people who were born overseas who came to the U.S. because they wanted to live the American life and wanted to protect our values and our democracy, who were amazing elected leaders and who did great things to protect and preserve our democracy and our values. I think that it's more of a values test than a nationality test, because frequently we see people who come from communist countries, some dictatorships, who value what we have more than some of the people who were born here. When you look at protesters on college campuses, the ideology of Marxism, it's not always coming from abroad. It's coming from people within. So I think it's not so much as saying, where were you born? It's a matter of asking people what values they adhere to.
And I agree with that in principle. Of course, if we were doing a values-based assessment, then no Democrat would ever be elected ever in any public office. But it's a lot harder to make a values-based assessment. And while there are obvious examples of some people who were foreign-born who do participate in an upright fashion in the American experiment and all of that, there are a lot of other examples of people who come here not just for nefarious purposes, but they come here and their allegiance is dual. I mean, look at Ilhan Omar. I mean, and some of these other members of Congress who say that they're truly representing Somalia rather than the United States of America. And so, from my perspective, and obviously you're welcome to disagree, but from my perspective, better to have a system where at least we prohibit the bad actors, even if that ends up, maybe we don't get the benefit of some of the good people who have come here, because they could serve in other capacities, appointees and so forth. But in terms of just actually straightforward elected officials, that to me is kind of a reasonable demarcation, because how else can we really assess value other than the voters? And we've seen that, unfortunately, campaigns can be full of propaganda, and the voters, aren't really as forthright as I think our founders probably expected.
Right, and I think to your point, when you're looking at this very case in California with Mayor Wang, I mean, people who were voting for her were being influenced by her own news site, which was a product of the Chinese Communist government. So even for Americans who try to be well informed, it's not always easy, because there is disinformation out there that's put out by adverse interests. So I think there is a valid case to be made that we do need to be more restrictive on who we put into office. At the end of the day, though, it speaks to the vetting problem that we have at all levels of government, even on courts, in the court system, in the judiciary, about actually knowing and getting to know well the people that we're voting for and we're appointing to these positions.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And, back in the founding era, people were known in their communities. It wasn't just the product of a PR campaign and, millions of dollars or, billions when you're talking about, the full Republican versus Democratic parties. It wasn't just about the campaign rhetoric. It was about actually knowing those people, and they were productive citizens outside of their service to government. And I really wish that we didn't have professional politicians, that we had people who serve their government, really part-time and then go back to being productive members of their communities. But for too long, we have not only enriched politicians, we've made it very lucrative to be a politician instead of a statesman, but then we've allowed people to not actually have any sort of requirement to be known in their communities before they run for office. And so there's a lot of things I think that we could and should look at tweaking in the whole process, but it's really difficult in an era where everything is so based on mailers and commercials and online ads and all of this. To your point, even people who try to stay informed, sometimes don't really know what the candidate values or believes other than what their campaign is talking about.
Oh, and absolutely right. And one of my favorite paintings in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol is Cincinnati's from the Field. It's the idea from our founding fathers that you are called to government service because you want to do a public good, but that's not the purpose of your life. The purpose of your life is to go back to your farm, to go back to your family, to go back to your business. We've become accustomed to professional politicians, and they have an agenda that once they have power, they don't want to leave. They want to give power to themselves and their allies. So we should really be looking at those people who have the good values and are not in government as professional, but are in government to make a difference. And we're running out of those people. We've turned into a nation where we consume news that is corrupt, and we decide our values are not as important as what we see online, and we put people in office who are there to stay, not to do good for us.
Yeah, and it seems like our system as well really discourages the people who are out to make a difference from running. I mean, even if we go all the way back to the Kavanaugh confirmation era, I think he was so spot on to say that, things like that kind of credibility and reputational obliteration campaign really discourages good people from seeking higher office because they don't want to go through that. They don't want to put their families through that. And so only people who maybe have a thicker skin and who are out for the professional politician's purpose is willing to go through all that because they expect it as sort of part of the job. And that's a really unfortunate part of politics as well, that, I don't know if there's really a solution to that.
No, I think what it comes down to is we need to be a lot more cognizant at the local level in local politics. And that's where all of this starts. It starts from your town, from your town council, from your village. That's where the brightest people in town, you get to know who they are. You know their personality. You know their values. And then when they do run for office, and whether it's state office or federal office, or they do seek an appointment to a government position, you know who they are because you've been involved with your community. I think in recent years, in the last few decades, we've been too easily distant from our local community, and we think the online community is where we live. It's not. We need to go back to our traditional values, to our friends and family and neighbors, and know them. And that's the pool of people that we want to be pushing into public office.
Yeah, and we need to go back to, instead of the television and federal news being sort of the epicenter of the home and of the community and everything online, that we go back to geography and saying, okay, my community is actually local, living local. And when the church was the center of the community and people actually gathered in person, there's so much that we've lost in the digital age that really is ultimately detrimental. But just in the last 2 minutes we have with you, Gerard Felitti, going back to this story of Eileen Wang, she's pled guilty. Do we know what the terms of the plea agreement are, and hopefully that, this type of thing can be prevented in the future?
I'm not sure that they agreed on an actual sentence for her. That I know that she faces up to 10 years in prison. So I would assume that because that's the maximum penalty under what she was charged with, that some deal will be cut where she's facing probably 2 or 3 years of prison, which is not insubstantial. But ultimately, this does send a deterrent message to the Chinese, especially that the timing is especially important because President Trump is now meeting with President Xi of China, that it sends the message that the United States is not asleep at the wheel under President Trump, that we are investigating foreign agents and for espionage, and that we are dealing with these issues and prosecuting them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a good thing that the DOJ is acting. And, like I've said repeatedly since Todd Blanche became acting AG, I think the DOJ might just, along with redistricting, kind of single-handedly win the midterms for Republicans, just because the DOJ seems like they're finally making some headway in some really important areas. So Gerard Felitti, really appreciate it. You should follow him on X and also the Lawfare Project. And that is all the time that we have this morning for Jenna Ellis in the Morning. I did get my X account back, so thanks so much to the Florida AG who actually got involved and escalated that up to X support. Appreciate that. So you can follow me as well. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.